It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megafoon Rugby.
Welcome to the Lekker Rugby Pod, and I've been waiting for this one for a while now. It took a bit of juggling, but we've got the two big storytellers in one room now. John Robbie, sort of a unicorn in the world of rugby, a British and Irish line, Irish international, and also selected for the Springboks. And then, of course, Harry Jones, the inimitable Harry Jones. So it's a pleasure to have you both here. And John, I'm going to start with you. We want to talk about Lions today, past, present, and future. And we're better to start in the 1980 tour that you were a Lion on yourself. Just tell us about that briefly and some of the main experience. And I want to specifically ask you your impressions of Bill Beaumont as a leader and as a person. I'll explain to you why a bit later.
Cool, Envy. First of all, great to be here. And great to finally meet Harry. I feel I know him from the podcasts. And I always sort of bracket people in the world into two types. There are people who are normal, and they're people who've got the rugby disease, okay? And Harry has got the rugby disease. When he talks about it, he loves the game, the traditions, the modern game, etc. So I'm delighted to meet Harry after all this time, and I'm looking forward to our chat. Bill Beaumont, for me, MV, is a legend, an absolute legend as a captain. I've said to you before, the most important thing on a Lions tour is the captaincy and the management. Because if you're seen to be showing favoritism in any way, if you can't let your cover down for a moment. Because if you're seen to be weak or incompetent in any way, it can destroy the whole tour. And I came in as a replacement before the first test and ended up staying for the whole tour and luckily playing in the final test, which was the winning test for the Lions against the Springboks. And all I can say is Bill Beaumont was like a father. I mean, I'd grown up playing rugby for Ireland, who were very weak and very amateur at the time. You know, some wonderful players, but looking at Wales and France at the time, ironically, given the Welsh situation at the moment, they were semi-professional or even professional, and we were amateurs. And for example, when we did physical work, we as the backs expected our big forwards, front row forwards and second row forwards, to be sort of meandering behind us somewhere. And it was quite a shock on the training sessions on the tour to see Bill Beaumont right up at the front. He never asked us to do anything that he didn't do himself. And following on from 1974, which was, although it was an amazing series for the Lions, Willie John McBride, it was also dirty. There was a lot of dirty play. You Google the Battle of Butt Erasmus, there'll be people there who wouldn't just have got red cards today, they'd have been put in jail. And I'm not joking. And I think with Bill Beaumont and Morné Duplessis, there were two captains who said, look, this is bigger than all of us. Let's make this series something special. So Bill Beaumont, I mean, I've heard mixed views about his leadership of rugby, some critical, some very complimentary. But for me, he'll always be a father figure. And I remember him with great affection.
Harry, I wanted to ask you about this specifically because this is the one place where you and John actually overlap in terms of Bill Beaumont. So tell me that little story you've been telling me about Bill Beaumont, and also about the after effect, the aftermath 40 years later.
Yeah, happy to meet you, John. It's nice to be in your presence. And I think I plead guilty to being chronically, terminally ill with the disease, the beautiful disease of rugby. There's nothing that can save me. I don't want the cure. Just let me die happy in rugby. It's interesting because of the threads of rugby. Rugby is an interesting sport because dyed-in-the-wool supporters have much longer memory than almost any other kind of sport, perhaps with the exception of maybe Liverpool, football fans or something. But for the most part, rugby guys can tell you what the overall record is between countries, what happened in 1980 in the sun in Newlands. And that was where, our school team was able to go and sit in that front rows of the first test. We were there mostly to support our big brother, Rob Lowe. He was a famous southern suburbs jeweler of the day, literally pop up, on school fields everywhere, giving us inspiration both off and on the pitch, to always shoot above our station in life, whether it was with the women or in rugby. And we tried our best. And so we were there in full voice on the train, 14, 15, 13 years old, with our Boda bags of rum smuggled in because the bottle shines in the sun. So you got to take a bag. It's easier to squish in there. And we were having such a good time. And in those days, you could really talk to the guys on the pitch. I mean, literally, Rob would give us a little wink as he was, running all over the place. But Billy Beaumont, before he was Sir William Beaumont with the keys to the London Bridge. You can drive cattle across it, apparently, with that honor. He was just Billy Beaumont. And I noticed as they went up to a line out, which in those days was basically a mosh pit of bad intention, I saw that Billy Beaumont had a pretty big arse. And there's that weird moment, even with 40,000 people, where right when you say the worst thing, everyone gets quiet. So as I was bellowing forth Envia and talking about Billy Beaumont's arse, I called it the big bum, it got too quiet. And we were right close. Newlands is close. And so when I actually met Bill Beaumont, I literally asked him about that and begged his forgiveness as the chair of World Rugby. And he, like a pope, he granted me, clemency. And so I'm now freed from the sin of addressing the captain of the Lions. But John, for me, this is a tradition and a thread that I love because it is something about it that's full of banter and it's never going to stop.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to interrupt there because a great friend of mine is Peter Winterbottom, who came out and played a year for Pirates Club here. And believe it or not, although he was the player of the year in Europe, he couldn't get on the Transvaal team. Val Bartman, Charles Peterson, and Yanni Briat kept him off the Transvaal team. And I once asked him, I said, "Well, you're not upset?" He said, "No, they were playing better than I did," which I thought was magnanimous of him. But he tells a great story of his debut for England was against Australia at Twickenham. And remember, in those days, the players didn't leave the team at halftime. Even if it was pouring rain, you got into a huddle and you had your team talk at halftime. And Bill Beaumont was the skipper. And they were playing Australia. And it was the incident, the famous Erica Rowe incident, the girl who streaked across Twickenham, who was, how shall I say, without being indelicate, she would never fall flat on her face. Let's put it that. And Peter Winterbottom, he's playing his test rugby for the first time. And Billy is standing in front of the team who are in a semicircle. And Billy realized that the team weren't listening. So he said, "For F's sake, guys, why are you not concentrating?" And Steve Smith, the scrum-half, said, "Sorry, Bill," he says, "but a woman's just run across the pitch with your ass on her chest." That backs up your story. Sorry for interrupting there, Harry.
No, it's to me that's what it's all about. One of the great tours that retrospectively has been classified as the British Lions, and then latter day the British and Irish Lions. It's a throwback in some ways because tours no longer exist in that way. A ship, 6 weeks. People who are taking time out from their professions to do this thing. And it still remains one of the only things where you can get 50,000 people to fly 24 hours around the world and spend a few weeks in their colors, singing, crying, exulting, jubilating. We work on this as a marketing technique and try to get people to do this in our leagues, much of which are in financial trouble. Lions doesn't ever have to worry about packing a stadium. And just like in the World Cup, you actually have a mixed audience. You literally have enough people from both sides where the groans and the cheers equal out. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up on that tour, though, getting on the field, because I've been watching some old footage of you. And listen, man, you absorbed the lesson of keeping your feet on the ground when you whipped that flat pass. It was going 25, 30 meters. All young scrum-halves watch that kind of stuff. You need to have a solid base, and just that one change seemed to light your team up, and you had more space at Loftus in the fourth test.
Well, it's very, very kind of you. I was lucky enough as a youngster, the Leinster Union, and bear in mind, Ireland was amateur. And some very forward-thinking people thought that if they got good coaches in at schoolboy level and under 19 level, this might stand Leinster rugby in good standing. And a guy called Des Scaife was the general manager of the Butlins holiday camp just north of Dublin. And so they used to run a week-long training course for youngsters. And believe it or not, they got some of the top coaches in the world. Carwyn James, before anyone had heard of him. There was Chalky White of Leicester. There was a great schoolboy coach called Jones, believe it or not. from Wales, Dr. Ollie Burke, who coached the Leinster under-19s. Wonderful. His sister was Mary Robinson, became president of Ireland. Wonderful, wonderful coaches who were there. And the one year, Chris Laidlaw came out. Chris Laidlaw, the legendary New Zealand scrum-half, who's probably the best passer of the ball off either wing. And remember, in those days, we played with the old leather ball. So it's not like this beautiful ball. I don't know how anybody can drop a ball or not pass it now. But in those days, it was quite a skill. And he taught me about the shifting of the weight, where you caught the ball, how you shifted it in one movement. And believe it or not, that was, I suppose, along with reading a game without being immodest, that was my real strength. It was the ability to pass off either wing, especially later on off either wing. And it breaks my heart now when I see some prop forward lumbering to a loose maul late. The ball comes out and I watch him firing off, these bullet spin passes. And I sort of say, my God, that was my skill. And so I was, and I've said it before, I was a very, very good player, but I was never a great player. Because when I came up with the great players, for or against, I realized there was that group of players, and I'm talking the Gareth Edwards, the Phil Bennetts, the Sid Goings, the Nas Botas, the Andy Irvins. Certainly, there were certain players who were just that cut above. So I was a very, very good player, and I was a very, very good captain. And I broke my leg playing for Ireland. I really was targeting the 77 Lions to New Zealand. And the day the team got picked, I broke my leg after about 4 minutes playing against France. And it was quite scary because about 2 weeks ago, I was flicking through YouTube and up suddenly came Irlande versus France, 1977, with Jean-Jacques Simlet, the great French commentator, Albaladejo, the great Monsieur Le Drop, the fly half of France, commentating on this game. And I said, that's where I broke my leg. So I actually, having never seen it before, I watched myself break my leg and get off the field. And I can tell you it hurt just as much this time. So I was out with a broken leg. Then I was at university in England, and a little guy called Colin Patterson arrived on the scene, who was a mercurial little scrum half and was so cocky and arrogant and just all the things that I wish I had been on the field but couldn't be. And he sort of dominated the position. And then I was lucky enough in 1980, when the Barbarians did their Easter tour, and they didn't let any of the Lions play on that Easter tour because they'd selected the side. And as a stop to Wales, because there was a lot of bad blood between Wales and England, because of a very dirty match that was played at Twickenham and Paul Ringer had been sent off, which was unheard of in those days. So for the last game, or for the Sunday game, which was Cardiff against the Barbarians, Bill Beaumont came down, even though he was captain of the Lions, and captained the Barbarians as this gesture to say to Wales, this is how much we respect Wales. And it had a great deal to mending the bad blood. It so happened that apart from the internationals and the varsity match, that was just about the only live game shown on television in those days. In the whole year, they didn't show live rugby because they said it would affect the crowds. And I had one of those days where everything just worked. You went for a half break, you sold a dummy, it was bored, you kicked to the corner, it bounced the right way. So afterwards, Sid Miller got in touch with me and said, you're the official replacement for scrum-half. Don't tell anybody, but stay fit. And then I was got invited to New Zealand, to Zimbabwe to play a game for the Goshawks against the Quackers. And I thought that would be my 1 week in Africa, ironically, because I've now been here for 44 years. And as we were warming up, there was a knock on the door. And as I'm telling you now, the goosebumps on my, the hairs on my arm. And a guy stuck his nose in and he said, someone has told me to tell you, Terry Holmes has got injured down in South Africa. You've got to play the game and then you've got to join the Lions. And amazingly, Harry, last year, a guy got in touch with me. He said he was the guy who gave the message, who opened the door. Someone just said to him, he was the guy who was just ushering the players. And that's when I joined the Lions and ended up having this fantastic tour. Not caring how I played, not caring if I got into the first team. I was a British and Irish Lion. And watching the Lions come on the field against the First Nations, the guys who were Scottish players who hadn't made it. I mean, even poor old Darcy Graham, whose Lions career is going to be 16 minutes. I just thought to them, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to show you now my most prized possession, which is this Lions cap. Because once you cross that field, in my day, you didn't even have to get on the field, as long as you were with the tour of the Lions. Nowadays, you have to get on the field, and you will get one of these, which is membership of one of the most exclusive clubs in the world. And whenever I'm feeling down or a little bit, depressed, whatever, I go and look at that in my cabinet, and it just makes me feel great again. And that's how every Lions player will always feel.
Yeah, it's like if you have a bad day where your grandkids or your kids are not giving you ultimate respect, you just go there, put that cap on, look in the mirror, and you say, there I am. Forever a Lion. Darcy Graham scored a try too. In my discussions with people over the years who have been Lions, all of them pretty much nowadays have been capped before. There was once a tradition of uncapped, but these are usually the best of the best. I'm struck by the awe that they experience, the almost reverence, is that the right word, that they have towards the idea of being picked by the Lions, which obviously doesn't really exist for All Black or Springbok. That's the pinnacle. And there's not really a amalgamation of these teams, which would be cool. And then you would, the best of the best. It'd be interesting to see what that would look like. 8-7, 7-8, whatever. The Lions, getting picked for the Lions seems to give people swagger the rest of their life, but also a deep humility. When you watch the people cry, like, the videos of the coaches giving that speech, and they're choked up, and big, strong men are crying. Talk to me a little bit about how they find out, because I know you found it a different way, but in the old days, did you get a letter? Like, were you just waiting for a letter? Because was it a telegraph? How did people find out they were a Lion? Nowadays, it's Instagram.
I think that's how it was in those days. As I say, what used to happen was you would get a letter earlier in the year if you were playing for your country. And some players, I think you mentioned players who went to the Lions and weren't internationals. The last one was Alan Lewis, who was scrum-half on that 77 tour. He was Cambridge. He was Wales B, but Gareth Edwards was around. And then after that, Brynmore Williams. So he never played for Wales, but he got a call up for the Lions. And he was the last one to fall into that very, very unique group. But what happened was, during the year, you'd get a letter, and it would say, asking about your availability, saying, this is not, you're not being selected for the Lions, but we want to know your availability. And particularly with the controversy, quite rightly, about touring South Africa, and I've said many times before, I regret it from a personal point of view because it was wrong, but from a rugby point of view, it was the highlight. So I have this great sort of dilemma, and I'll never hide from that. I'll say that I am ashamed with one half and I'm proud with the other half. So I presume that the guys who got called, there was none of this big announcement like they have now with cameras on the families and all that sort of thing. I presume you'd get a letter in the post or a phone call telling you were with the Lions, and then there was always the line that says, and of course we respect the amateur ethos of the day, but there will be an allowance of 10 shillings per day or something ridiculous like that. And for Ireland, they always used to say, you will be provided with a jersey and socks, but you must provide your own shorts, clean white, sort of nonsensical stuff. There was probably a copy of a letter from, 50 years before. So it was always like that. One thing I'm sorry I missed was part of the tradition was the weekend in Bournemouth. The Lions always used to meet in the holiday town of Bournemouth and have that warming up weekend. Nowadays, of course, they warm up and have a match like they did against Argentina in Dublin. But that weekend is always special because the players have to bond, which usually is done over alcohol and choosing the songs that they're going to sing, etc. And even that is something that's quite unique. You get some Lions teams. I believe the 1950 Lions were known as the Singing Lions because they were singers and they sang. The 55 Lions in South Africa, where Cliff Morgan played the piano, and he was also the choir master because he sang in a choir at church. And I spoke to the late great Tony O'Reilly, and he could still sing Sari Maria in Afrikaans because they'd learnt that on the tour. Other tours didn't quite have those social traditions. We were sort of average, but the 1968 Lions, who were a naughty bunch, they wrecked hotels and did silly things, or some of them did. And amazingly, they've had about 20 reunions of their team from 1968. My team, even though it was a very happy tour, has never had a single reunion. of which I'm rather disappointed. But it always happens when there's a couple of players take it upon themselves to organize the reunions. Roger Young being one of them.
One of the fascinating things, and you can watch this nowadays, everyone on Lekker Rugby Pod, you can watch the Ultimate Test, which is a YouTube channel that the British and Irish Lions have created, and there's I think one or two a week, and you get behind the scenes. One of the fascinations is erstwhile recent enemies, and I'm talking bitter enemies of the Six Nations. In some cases, bitter enemies from history and from like your childhood, like deep enmities. It's like MV&I, Pretoria, Cape Town, but really baked in. They have to turn around and become best mates. They're rooming together, so you see odd sights. Most recently, Duan van der Merwe, and you have Henry Pollock and Josh van der Fleer. It's not a threesome I would have put together. They're going diving in the Great Barrier Reef together and having such a great time together, almost like clean-shaven Vikings in the water. Talk to us about how does that work? I mean, the enmity between Ireland and England, for example, that's some real shit.
It never really applied on the rugby side, I don't think. I mean, there was I tell you the great story. I'm not sure if I told MV before, but of Moss Keane, who was this legendary Irish lock forward, who came across as this big sort of lolloping lock forward with a Kerry accent, who actually was an incredibly bright guy, had a master's degree in agriculture, chemical agriculture and so on. But he sort of played this Gombeen man role to the hilt. And there was the great story about, well, there were two of them. The one was that when after the game, someone said, "What did you think of the game, Moss?" And he said it was a game of two halves. He said the first half was even and the second half was even worse. And the other great story of him running on Twickenham, and Tony Neary, the great England and Lions flank forward, was running out as the teams ran out. And Tony said, "May the best team win, Moss." And Moss said, "I hope not." I mean, you can imagine. So, and also, even in my day, even though there wasn't the sort of the European Championship, there were Barbarians games, there were Irish Wolfhound games, there were invitation games that if you were in or around the international scene, you got to play together. But it's true. I mean, I remember a story of when the Lions came here, not the last time, but the time before, and they had a scrum-half called Phillips, big, tall, 6'3" scrum-half, who was a terrific player, but everybody seemed to hate him because he had that arrogance about his play. And I remember reading some of the talk afterwards, and some of the English and Irish guys playing that, in fact, it was Brian O'Driscoll said. Brian O'Driscoll, who I know well, I knew his dad even better. And Brian O'Driscoll, I think, said that, we hated this guy. We hated him. And then you got on a Lions tour with him, and you discovered he was one of the most honest workers, one of the most loyal guys, fun off the field, etc. And that, funnily enough, with the memories of a Lions tour, I think back to the things that happened off the field as much as on the field, and little acts of kindness or friendliness or whatever. And even the other day, I spoke to Gareth Davis, who was fly half on that tour until he got injured. And I was on the phone to Gareth Davis. Someone phoned me and said, in fact, it was Martin Gillingham, who's the commentator on television in the UK now, one of them. And he was interviewing Gareth Davis. And just for fun, he phoned me. And so I had a chat with a guy I hadn't spoken to for, 45 years. And he says, "John Robbie," says, "in Wales, we used to call you Ron Jobby." And I thought, a little tiny incident like that you remember, and it all goes back. And the saddest thing now is, I mean, I'm 69. The saddest thing is that you see on the internet that one of your teammates has passed away. He died, he got ill, he got sick. Peter Morgan, who was a sort of utility back, wonderful guy. He looked like an old man. His nickname was Fagin, after the character in the operas, Fagin, Charles Dickens. And he passed away. And immediately you think back to the events. And I've told MV the story. On my tour, we played against Eastern Transvaal, which is the one fixture you want to miss, or you want to miss in South Africa. Hambrink Stadium, the ground like concrete, a mad team out to kill you, fans who are out to kill you. I mean, it's the game you want to miss. And luckily I missed it. But after the game, and the stadium is known as Pam Brink because it's Petrus Amadeus Martinus Brink, some official, Pam, and his nickname was Pam. And afterwards in the dressing room, it was like a dressing station from Passchendaele. There were bandages and blood, and the Lions had won a narrow victory, and there was silence in the dressing room. And Peter Morgan said, in his Welsh accent, he said, "I don't know who this Pam Brink was, but she must have been one hell of a tough woman."
That's genius.
From Peter, that immediately I was back in that dressing room. And I guess every Lions player will be the same for the rest of their lives.
John, this new jersey that the Lions are playing with in Australia, I mean, I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and Harry's co-host on the 8-9 combo down in Australia, who lives in Australia. I share a sort of a passion with him about the font they're using. It's a bit of a stupid question to ask, but does it bother you maybe that it's not as red as it should be and the letters are a bit funny? Do you like the idea of changing the Lions up a bit, keeping it fresh, or do you think they should stick to tradition more and the likes?
I hate it. We were, I think, one of the last Lions tours that had no shirt maker's name, and that red pure shirt with the badge. In fact, they didn't even have that leaping lion above they have it now, and they're the Lions 1888. We just had that particular badge. So I hate it. But of course, it's about business. I mean, they didn't have to pay, as I say, we got 10 bob a week, a day or something. So now you have to pay these vast salaries, and obviously you make the jerseys unique so people will collect them. But the sort of funeral numbers they have in the back that look like something you see in a church at a funeral, I battled to get used to that one. And funnily enough, Ollie Campbell, I said I met him just recently in Ireland, and he had a Lions shirt there that he got signed and he was giving to his school, and he brought it just to show me. And it's more purple than red. It's not that bright red that the Lions had, but even the green flash at the top of the socks, you can hardly see it. Why didn't they make it so you can see it, and therefore you say, each country is represented in the jerseys, etc. But I suppose that's just old traditionalists like us, MV. I don't like seeing it personally, but I suppose it still represents the same thing, and that's modernity.
Harry, you talked about the way that the Lions are playing lately, and I was wondering about, you mentioned about them being enemies and likes, but also different countries play different types of rugby. Now you bring them into the Lions. You have a couple of weeks, a weekend in Bournemouth. Was that how you pronounce it, John? And now suddenly you have to be a sort of a unified team with cohesion and everything. How does that work? I mean, talk to me about what you're seeing with these Lions, and what do you think? How do they do it? Get these guys to play together in a different style than what they used to?
Yeah, so I think you're always balancing the idea that cohesion itself, as an abstract idea, will win out against the idea of the best. When you gather iron sharpens iron, if you're looking across the way and you have, generational players, you all want to outdo each other. And so that can top up. And then maybe the sort of the conglomeration of that is you have the spine of a team, whether it's a Scottish back line or you have sort of an Anglo-Irish pack, and you can build around it with enough coherence that it works. The truth of the matter is it's always been thus that the Lions as a conglomerate outperforms the constituent countries in their tours of the Southern Hemisphere Giants. So 17% of matches won in New Zealand is higher than each individual country has experienced. 35% wins in South Africa is also far better than anyone who's done. It took till recently for Ireland to even win one against South Africa. It's 75% in Australia, right? So this is always the off tour. This is the one where the Lions actually come in usually as favorites and they win 3 out of 4. But there's enough time for great players to cohere, understand each other. Plus you have people like Finn Russell, who's probably on the far end of the spectrum of fitting into anybody. Like you could just sort of drop him in a loincloth over a jungle. Within 2 weeks, he's running the town, not even knowing the language. So there's just people who are special. To John's point about leadership, you have a team full of captains and they really respect each other. Then Maro Itoje has so many lieutenants. He can look across at Ty Burn, and Ty Burn's going to sort of handle the line out. And then you might have a guy who's, Ellis Gange, who's your spirit captain. and he's just going to tell you to run through walls and stuff. It does get better. And I think that's why it's still a magical thing. It's not passé, it's not obsolete. People still travel with 50,000 Lions visitor in Australia right now. That's a hell of a trip. And they're all dropping 15,000 quid, So there's something that motivates people to see that. And it also feeds into this, Mvia. We all like to do, what would be our fantasy team? How could we pick together All Blacks and Springboks together from 2011 to 2023? It's fun. And so John, when you look at this nowadays, how do you see it happening?
Yeah, I disagree with Mvia, because if you look at rugby now, most teams play the same way. If you think about it, most teams play the same way. You do your best up front. Obviously, you want to win scrums, for example. In fact, that's one area I've been amazed at how well the Australian scrums have held up to the Lions scrum. I expected that to be the dominant one, and I was telling everyone, first scrum in Australia, the first scrum, watch this. This is going to be significant. And in fact, it wasn't. And they haven't really dominated until the last few minutes of a couple of games. But if you look at the skills people have got now, they're very much the same. I mean, the tackling is hard. It's robust. The jackling is there. You tackle the guy goes in. The lineouts are, I don't know how the lineouts work these days. You've got these musical chairs with people jumping all over the place. The lineout goes through. They nearly all now move the ball and straighten with that loop. I mean, it's so amazing to see players, even big lock forwards, they just take it and they pop it behind their head, knowing that someone is going to loop round. I think that the key is the dominance. Once you can establish that dominance, and that's where the Lions really should have an advantage with four better sides. And in a funny way, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, the Lions are like their last performance was disappointing." But I don't want to see them win every game by 30, 40, 50 points. I want to see the local teams up for it, give a performance of their like the First Nations side did the other day, and hopefully we'll have a better, a narrower test coming up on Saturday.
Well, obviously the sharing of coaching IP, where you have top New Zealand coaches spending their sabbatical sort of in Ireland and coming back and cross-pollinating Ronan O'Gara, the Crusaders, and then La Rochelle, Rossi picking up stuff from Munster. There is a certain homogenization of rugby in that, we can expect in a certain situation, there's going to be a box kick because it actually is the best option in certain, phase 5. You've run out of steam. You don't want to lose the ball in that area of the field, but you also want to have it contestable. The differences are we watch Super Rugby deeply, and as I have to do for the Australian podcast, there are some variations that are different. And I would say the lineout's one of them, in that Super Rugby, a lot of these lineouts and scrums are almost just quick rush, not quite the same detail. So when you see Mara Itoje and Tiber, and they are like Matt Field type gurus of the lineout, they read the Australian lineout. Tom Curry, when he saw the hooker torque for that overthrow, it was like the throw was designed for him. So I think there's a massive supremacy there, because the Prem and the ERC, as we call it, are really line out, like practitioning leagues, and the Super Rugby is not. They had one of the lowest. When you take all their averages of line out success, they're not blowing it up as much. They're just calling it no contest and move on, because they want to get to phase play. The second area where they are different is around the breakdown, which is fascinating, because the Super Rugby has become more isolated with the absence of South Africa and Argentina. And so the way they play the breakdown is different. And I think that's part of the magic, MVA, to see. So what will the Aussie open-siders, McWright, Tizano, Charlie Gamble, in these off midweeks, how do they play against the way the Irish in particular clean rucks, which is very different from Super Rugby? That's probably the only thing I think is actually meaningfully different nowadays. Breakdown, there's 200 of them a game, and these lineouts, which are about 20, 25 a game.
It's interesting you say that about the Southern Hemisphere, but I can guarantee you, if in the mud the Crusaders suddenly discover they're dominant in the scrum over the Chiefs, by goodness, they're not going to put it in and out. They're going to grind forward.
Exactly.
Because, but it's changed slightly. But in the last couple of years, well, it's changed because there's so few scrums. I mean, I saw that game recently. I think it was either in Europe or, I mean, there's so much rugby now. I get mixed up with it. There's too much rugby, I believe. But it was one of the games, either that in Super Rugby, where in the whole of the first half, there wasn't a single scrum. Not a single scrum. I mean, that is unbelievable. But until, fairly recently, when the number of scrums went down, and I give, as an example, the World Cup final in Japan, South Africa against England, when that first scrum went backwards, you knew South Africa were going to win. Basically, the game was over from that first scrum. And one of the great debates is safety against the spirit of the game. And you've got to be safe, etc. But equally, if you take the physical side out of it, and I was looking back at even that clip you sent me of my Lions game, where there was a scrum and I made a little break and it led to a try. You look at that scrum, there was none of this touch, crouch, hold, pause, engage. The scrums looked at it and they just went down, and I put the ball in channel one and away. And sometimes you wonder, is there just too much being put into the technical side? And the referees are so frightened of making a mistake now. It's so terrible to see. I mean, you never celebrate a try now, because you have to wait until they go upstairs to check if in, a ruck, the previous ruck, someone had got a finger in somebody's ear, and therefore you could call it back. And that balance, I think, between safety, between getting it right, and between allowing the game to flow is somehow not working.
Yeah, and you're right about the danger of a one-sided series looming, because if you watch the game properly, the test one in Brisbane, the game was over in 45 minutes. You're not going to come back from that kind of deficit. And then they sealed it with a 15-point advantage with a penalty goal right in front. They could have sat down there and gone for a try as well if they wanted to. That is the danger, and it primarily rests on this one thing. Australia, and I'm exempting New Zealand. New Zealand can handle the rush defense, and they do have proper scrums, and they're really, power game. Australia is not used to facing a blitz, barge, big hit defense, the kind that Ringrose and Bundyaki and the loose forwards bring, where they're in your face. Tom Curry is meeting you and ball at the same time, and they keep saying it's offsides. And I've told our Australian friends, it just looks offsides to you because you're not facing the rush defense. Irish boys playing South African boys in the Irk, that's all they're trading every week. You get a half a second. You've got no space, and you've got to deal with it. So talk to me about the second test. And do you think there's anything Joe Schmidt, a really clever coach, known for his starter plays and his abilities to, recalibrate, can he ambush the Lions in any way? Or is this kind of just one of those deals where the one team has just got too much power and speed off the line versus the other?
It's hard for me, and let me make an admission here. I would be far safer talking about rugby in 1980, 70, 80, 90 when I played, which was much simpler in many ways. Sometimes now the particularly around the ruck and the jackling, as they call it now, and use it or lose it and first in, etc. Sometimes the intricacies of that are lost, as is the intricacy or the benefit of kicking. The hoof up in the air, and we talk about winning the collisions. So often it seems so meaningless and so pointless. And you hoof it up in the air, and if you're lucky enough that the ball comes back and you win the game, afterwards we talk about how wonderful the kicking game was. If you lose it, and therefore counterattack comes in and you lose a couple of tries, everyone talks about how bad the kicking. The one thing I know about Joe is, and I was very, very privileged to have an evening with him and then dinner with the Irish team when they were over, is that his knowledge of the game and his micromanaging of the game is unbelievable. In fact, at the end, I think with Ireland, that almost became a weakness. He was almost too closely involved. But he will be there. Firstly, the Australian scrum, I think, stood up magnificently well. That's got to be a big plus. It's very interesting, the rush defense. I remember talking to or listening, I can't remember, Ronan O'Gara, who, believe it or not, I bumped into in New Zealand when he was coaching one of the coaches for the Crusaders. And I met him on the field. I said, "Hey, Ronan, how are you doing?" And he looked at me and he said, "Didn't we meet in Greystones? What are you doing?" And it was lovely. And we had a chat. And he always talked about that rush defense and how you deal with it. And he used the phrase flailing arms. He said that if you take a rough rush defense and you've got skill, you can actually end up running against a flailing arm rather than that. And that's something I haven't really seen. The other thing is, of course, kicking, your kicking game. I still think this drop, and I'm noticing sides doing it more often now, this push kick through or the kick dropping over. And I think as an attacking weapon, that's not being used enough. And we see it in rugby league. I mean, I can appreciate rugby league, but to me, it's checkers, whereas rugby is chess. Okay? There's more to rugby. Rugby league, you take your number of bash, 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 and then you kick, bash, 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 kick. But I noticed when they do that final kick near the goal line, they put those little kicks through an attacking grubber, etc. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see, for example, I'll give you an example. Conan at number 8 is a terrific player, but I wouldn't think he would like to turn that massive frame and go backwards too quickly. And I would think that, it's a risk because the ball bounces wrongly and then your attacker takes the ball and goes straight through. But I think Joe has got to come up with something. And I think he will have, I think we don't know the side yet if Ballantini is going to play, because I think that is a big, big loss for the Australians because he brings that hardness and physical play. I would be disappointed if they didn't come up with something a little bit different. And I think it might be to do with kicking.
No, John. So interesting that Jacques Nienaber, who's sort of the godfather, along with Sean Edwards, of this incredibly high line, high pressure blitz defense that it actually relies on people coming out of the line and separating and not remaining connected. Sort of a doctrinal, almost like a heresy in rugby, and it works. But Jacques freely admits, as does Sean, there is space. There's two big pockets of space by doing this rush. One is the drop over, the grubber, the diagonal, the chip kick. It's there and it's real. The other one is the false goal, the fool's goal, which is way on the outside, which they almost go, hey, take it, try to get the ball to your wing, and then let's see whose loose forwards can get there. And also, by the way, all of our centers can jackal and they can maul, they can counteract. It's a terrible thing to do usually. It's that space right over the top that I think Joe will be wetting, his lips will be wetting like, yeah, look at that. That was there in the First Nations Pacifica. That was there, the Brumbies. That was there, the Waratahs. Little moments can turn a match. So, yeah, I think we're all hoping for a tighter second test, which kind of brings up the point of, Brian Moore put out sort of a clickbaity article in Telegraph, which just said, obviously New Zealand, South Africa needs to get the Lions tours, but in that third rotation, Australia shouldn't be an absolute, because what about Argentina? What about France? What's your view on that? And does that go way too far away from tradition?
Well, first of all, I've never met Brian Moore, and I find him hugely interesting. And of course, he co-commentated with one of my great friends, the late Eddie Butler, who I was at university with, and just couldn't believe when he passed away. And Eddie said, no, Brian's a good guy, but he plays the role. He plays the role of the irritant, if I can put it that way. And again, it comes back to that balance between tradition and between progress. And I mean, you mentioned earlier on a possibility of a New Zealand and Australian side coming together and picking up, or even a Springbok side combining a Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. And I would hate to see that because it would take the uniqueness of the Lions away. The Lions is unique in that I think, along with the Ryder Cup European team, it's probably the only thing in sport that takes you above your nation. In major sports, takes you above your nation. And I would hate to see other people copying it. I think that this business of playing a Lions test against Argentina, for example, as a warm-up, might be terrific. But if you started moving Lions playing against, again, the other side of it is the money side of it. Playing in the Super Bowl stadium with America, with TV, Soldiers Field, a World 15 against the Lions. I think that's going to devalue what this Lions does, because the Lions was founded in 1888. So many of the traditions still apply. And I think let me put it this way, be very careful before you mess with tradition, because you have something unique here. And if you spoil it, it'll be very, very hard to get it back. Let me put it that way.
In the common law, we talk about bad facts make bad law. And this, what that means is if you legislate and change laws around the weirdest, most exotic set of facts all the time, you're going to wind up with some very lopsided and strange law. So the fact that Australia right now is sort of 6th, 7th, 8th in the world, which is unusual, sort of their lowest depths, and the fact that the Argentina game that was played in Dublin is probably the best game that's been played so far on the tour, that's sort of, it's a very small sample size. So beware the idea of staging a tour to Argentina. It falls flat. It's a run over as well, but it's much more difficult to get to Salta, Mendoza, and Rosario than it is. First of all, you're also feeding into the expats. When you have a Lions tour in Australia, there's plenty of people going as Lions fans that live there. It's not totally about travel. I think that's and I think Lions have always been commercial. I think the whole thing was set up as a commercial venture in the beginning, just with different money men and different goals. So you always have to worry about that. But I don't think there's too many things in top level rugby that are like the Lions. I love your Ryder Cup analogy because all the players say that they are sweating bullets during the Ryder Cup. Guys who don't worry about making that 7-foot putt on their own, when it's standing over that same putt on behalf of the USA or the Europe team, apparently they are absolutely terrified. So talk to me about levels. The Lions it's the highest level for a guy growing up like you, right? And that it's hard you can never replace that, never replicate that with another way.
Yeah, it is, and it's when I look at the Lions, and again, it's funny how, and I've said this to a couple of the Lions. Funnily enough, I played rugby against Gary Ringrose's dad many years ago, Niall Ringrose, and I was involved in an incident where he was playing for Blackrock College, I was playing for Greystones, my club, and I scored a try after he made a mistake, and. As I came back, apparently I said to him, sorry about that, Gary, which I've never forgotten. And so he actually, when I was back in Ireland, he sent through a Blackrock tie to say he's never forgotten it, whatever. This is a previous time I was back. So I was so thrilled when Gary got his place on the Lions, having narrowly missed out twice, that I phoned him. And I was chatting to him about the Lions and shooting the breeze about old times. And I said, and it came to me while I was chatting about Gary. And I said, tell Gary to do everything. You talk about swimming in the Great Barrier Reef, always do something, see something, get up, go. And there's a trip to a church, go and see it, do etc. Because those will be the memories. And I said to Niall, to pass on to his son, I said that you probably don't realize what it means to play for the Lions now. It's when you're later and you look back on it, like I do now as an old man sitting here. And I look back at my Lions cap, I realize the enormity of it. And the incredible thing is, it's not the great players who played for the Lions that make it so special. It's the great players who never played for the Lions, who for whatever reason, they were injured, they were out of favor, they were out of form. I mean, I look at Peter Stringer, the little Irish scrum-half, played for Munster, won 100 caps for Ireland. I look at Danny Kerr, the English scrum-half, wonderful, wonderful player, 100 caps for England. They never played for the Lions, whatever reason. Jonathan Davis never played for the Lions. I look back in my day, Kevin Flynn, who played in 3 decades for Ireland in the centre, was probably the best attacking centre in the world. And yet for some reason, in a Lions year, he never quite made it. And then there's little old me who snuck onto a Lions tour. There's Darcy Graham, who had an 18-minute Lions tour. And I think back to my Lions tour, before I arrived in the very first game against, can you believe it, Eastern Province in Butt Erasmus, the toughest team in the whole country. And they made damn sure the Lions played in their first game. And it was always to soften up and test the Lions. And Stuart Lane, the Welsh flanker, got injured in the first minute of that game. He got injured in the first minute of the first Lions game and stayed on for a week or so to be part of it, but went home. But it doesn't matter. He's as much a Lion as Willie John McBride. So I think that it's the enormity of it, and as I say, looking back on it, it is even more incredible when you're an old man. And I just think there was talk. The money men were saying, well, hold on a second. England are touring and Ireland are touring, and we have to make money, and we have to have our first teams there to guarantee this, that, and the other, blah, blah. Maybe we should do away with the Lions. And I tell you, there would be a revolution amongst the players. If you did away with the Lions and took away, there would be marching in the street. And I tell you what, I'd be one of them.
Talking about that test, Loftus, the fourth test that you played in, you talked about memories and special things that happened. Give me a bit of the sense of the occasion. The crowd, Loftus is notoriously hostile and everything else. Tell us about that one. Tell us a tale or two.
Oh, gosh, that game. The first thing was I bumped into somebody recently who said I was at Tucky's, and the day before the test, the night before the test, you came down to our hostel and gave a talk. And I remember it now because it was after the team meetings and it was before bed. We were hanging around and some guy rocked up, student, and said, we've got a hostel. And I'd been a student. And I got on the back of his motorbike and got to the thing. When I got there, I realized he was half pissed and the whole hostel was pissed. And I gave a little talk, and then I think I got a taxi back or whatever and went in. You couldn't imagine that happening today. But that was one of my memories. The other was that the Lions had lost 3 tests very narrowly. And this was the 4th one. And the Springboks and South Africans and probably little MV Welman in his short pants was there hoping that the Lions would get a whitewash. So it was absolutely vital. The tension was palpable. And I'd been brought into the test team. Colin Patterson played in the game against Griquas, which was another tough game. But I was going to play in the test. I played against Western Province the week before. And then Colin damaged his knee and never played again. And I had to play the midweek game against Griquas. But then we got to Pretoria and the whole place was buzzing. And it was triumphal. It was triumphal. The Springboks were going to get revenge for 1974 and go one better. They were going to win 4-0. Not 3 and a draw. And I remember going to Loftus, and Loftus was, in those days, you played the game, there was a national anthem, and you played the game. Now they had lights and rockets and marching bands and dancing girls. It was like an American football thing, which we'd never seen before. And who was the manager of the Blue Bulls at the time? A dark-haired guy, very, very powerful guy. He was the manager of the Blue Bulls and the commercial manager. Mm-hmm. I've forgot Rob. I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, he made this a great occasion. And I'll never forget in the dressing room, Billy Beaumont he gave us his talk and he said, we have to win this game. At that stage, I don't think any Lions team had ever won a 4th test because you've been on tour for so long. You want to get home. You bought your presents. You're packing. You want to go home. No team had won a 4th test. So we were highly motivated for it. And then he said one of the stupidest things that I've ever heard in a dressing room. He said, no Lions player will step into touch. Meaning that if you are there and it doesn't matter who's running at you, you're not going to step into touch. You're going to take the knock. And I think I told you this story before, MV. During the game, at one stage, Naas Botha put a grubber through, and the game was tight. It was 17-13 or something. And I, as a good scrum half, was covering, and I took the ball, and I looked up, and there was Ray Mort running towards me. Now, think of a young buffalo in the prime of its health with the speed of a cheetah. That was Ray Mort in those days. And I was about to step into touch, job well done. And I remembered Billy's words. And so I took Ray Mort on shoulder to shoulder, and I couldn't walk for a week, 3 weeks afterward. I think he knocked me up in the air, landed on my coccyx, and nearly killed myself. And that's when I remember how stupid those words were. And I just remember the game. We were ahead. We scored some good tries. Ollie Campbell amazingly missed some kicks. Andy Irvin took over the kicks, and then Ollie twinged a hamstring at the end. And I remember nursing the team by dropping the ball into the box, playing that little short side, and then the whistle blew. And I played in a winning test match. I'd never done it for Ireland. I'd lost every test I'd played for. And there's a picture of me somewhere sitting in the dressing room with a cool drink in my Lions gear. And I remember thinking, it doesn't get better than that. So as I say, we were wrong to go to South Africa, and I say it with honesty and some shame. But from a rugby perspective, winning that test and playing that test, and even talking to you, MV, and you asking me about it, I've got goosebumps once again.
John, yesterday in preparation for this chat, I was watching that entire match and I was gathering little clips and sending them to you. And I was, obviously I want you to like me. So I was sending the nice ones where you shaking and baking and you're like doing mini half breaks and you're jolting into the interior, putting Andy Irvin away. But for some reason he decides not to score in Gesi Pina. But I actually saw exactly the clip you're talking about. And I thought, because Ray Mort, for those who didn't go back in time and watch him scoring three tries against the All Blacks, one of the only guys to ever do that, he's running over people. Ray Mort in 1980 had a six-pack and proper muscles that you would see today on the most elite athletes. Whatever he was drinking somewhere in the Bulawayo area or something, whatever he had found the magic for, he had it. And he was a proper weightlifter. And I felt sorry for you in that moment. I saw it and I thought, I'm not going to send him that clip because it looks highly painful and maybe paralyzed you. But in the end, I thought it was a magic match to watch because it did seem like you guys were playing for glory. Obviously nothing was on the line in some ways, but you were just like playing like Lions should on the high felt. And I enjoyed it. And by the way, there's different nuances on how people think about how they should have toured or not toured. I actually think I'm the other side of that. I think there are so many people that I grew up with in the Cape, on the wrong side of the tracks, who took heart for that. They cheered for you, actually, in Cape to Newlands, and some of them ended up playing for the Boks in a free multiracial team. And some of them tell the story of falling in love with rugby, high level rugby, because you came. So there's two sides to everything. But no, I just wanted to say I felt sad for you in that moment, and I feared for your safety because Ray Mort was like a modern winger playing against someone in 1980 who probably wasn't lifting weights in those days.
Do yourself a favor. There's actually, if you Google Ray Mort tries, because he went with Rob Lowe to rugby league and played with Wigan in rugby league. And in fact, his story, I've interviewed Ray. I'm very good friends with Ray, and he's done extremely well in business. Everyone thought he was sort of a jock only, but he's done extremely well in business. He owns restaurants in Cape Town. He owns a factory here. And I know Ray very, 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 very well. And if you Google that Ray Mort tries from rugby league and rugby union, and then go and do the same for Donny Kerber tries, you will see players who today would be worth millions and millions of pounds because they were very special.
Okay, John, we've spent almost an hour talking to each other. I can't believe it. So I would have spent another hour, and I think we must do this again at some stage. So thank you for that. Thank you for making time for us. And I still have to come visit your bar, Maybe when Harry's in South Africa, we can make a turn there.
No, I would love to have you here, guys. And again, I love shooting the breeze, and I love the modern game, and I love the professionalism of the modern game, and I love the analysis, etc. But I think sometimes people forget their history. I remember MV, and I don't mean to embarrass you. You'd never heard of Mike Gibson, the greatest players of all times. And I see now where Owen Farrell comes up and they say 4 Lions tours. And then you see at the top, Willie John McBride, 5, Mike Gibson, 5. And sometimes it's good to look back because many parts of rugby are exactly the same. And what I'm pleased to see, particularly Darcy Graham coming, that there is room for the small, nippy guy with a big heart. And of course, we see Cheslin, Colby, and looking at the South African under-20 side, gee whiz, the youngsters coming through now. And we talk about beating a rush defense. Thank goodness there's still room for skill, that the skillful little guy can still beat the big gorilla coming towards him. And sometimes maybe I get stuck a little bit in the past, but I don't mean to. It's just because that was my experience. I love the modern game. I will watch it always. I just find there are certain things that bug me. The refereeing, I feel the standard of refereeing is incredible, but the scrutiny of refereeing is so unfair. They're so scared to make a decision now, they have to go back because people will criticize. The Australian commentators are a disgrace. I think Richie Beno commentated on the BBC on cricket for 50 years, and he never once called Australia we. He never said we when he commentated on Australia. And I wish we'd get back a little bit to the spirit of things. I don't know if you noticed on this tour, there have been a couple of, little incidents, whatever, or a guy gets hammered or something, and then the other guy will help him up and give him a little bit of a pat. Now, it doesn't mean you don't lose the sharp incidents with, Owen Farrell jumping in to defend. I mean, there's no punching anymore. But I love that little bit of sportsmanship coming through. So, there's still part of the old game that's part of rugby, and long may it continue.
Man, for me, it was a great privilege and honor to talk to you, John, and also a lot of fun. I mean, I could talk to you all day. And also you brought up a really interesting image that everyone now is scrambling to find is MV in Kortbroeke. Let's find it, everyone, and post it. We want to see Don Quixote with these little shorts.
Yeah. John, I'm called the Loftus Don Quixote because I'm on a lone crusade against the DJ at Loftus.
and especially beat Caroline.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what country in the world you go to, Sweet Caroline. It's because people love it.
Yeah. No, I've been fighting against it valiantly. Not so much Sweet Caroline, but when they play Sweet Caroline, in the middle of a kickoff or a line out or a scrum or something, time it better, guys. Yeah. At least we had some breakthroughs there, so that worked quite well for us. Mary, evidence of my childhood is, under lock and key. I promise you that. Anyway,
cheers, guys.
Thanks, appreciate it.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.